Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Retrospective. Now, I don't usually make videos like this, but this time around I feel especially obligated to honor this particular game, because by the time this video's been uploaded, it's going to be the first year anniversary of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 in its original launch on December 1st, 2017, and it's been a very eventful year. For those of you guys that don't know, not just for the channel that you guys are watching right now, but following the Rocky release all that time ago, there have been plenty of examples of post-launch support from Monolith Soft, and honestly, the game that we have right now is just remarkably different, whole world's difference from the game we originally got back in December, and we're going to be looking back on that today for the retrospective. Before we get into the meat of this video, I just want to mention my own little background story for this particular game, and how we came around to covering stuff like this, to making videos about Xenoblade Chronicles 2. So, my first time discovering this particular game was actually back in late 2016 when they had the original Nintendo Switch Direct. I noticed that this was going to be a sequel of sorts to the original Xenoblade Chronicles 1, a game which some of you guys might remember as being part of Operation Rainfall, which I was supporting of in some capacity almost a decade ago. Unfortunately, while I was very familiar with the Xeno series, particularly with Xenogears and Xenosaga, I never really got around to playing Xenoblade Chronicles for the Wii, or even Xenoblade Chronicles X for the Wii U. It wasn't even because I had a particular disdain for those games, it's just that it happened to be that there were other games at the time that I would prefer to play instead. That being said though, when this game was originally released, I became more and more intrigued by it, and honestly, I feel that part of the reason why this game was put under the radar and why it was able to put Xeno into the mainstream in ways that previous games could not is thanks in no small part to the fan service. Now obviously, people can have whatever opinions they can of fan service, but if done effectively, just like with any other resource in a game, whether it's like a graphics or a soundtrack, if it's used effectively, it's going to do great things for the game, but used ineffectively, it's going to get in the way. Thankfully, in the case of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, it was mostly the former, and honestly, it was because of the faux controversy with certain publications, particularly with Kotaku and Polygon, that this game has been put under my radar, and I'm pretty sure for countless others that are watching this video right now. The controversy, of course, that I'm talking about is regarding one of the main characters' designs. I'm talking, of course, about Pyra. You guys probably already know about this, but I'll just quickly gloss over this right now. The funny thing about the Pyra controversy that I found very compelling is that I kind of had to look at it from the perspective of someone that loves to make characters, as someone that enjoys writing and reading. And one thing I've always come to know in my own life is that the design of a character is only the tip of the iceberg. You can only understand so much about them, only glean so much of their backstory. You really do have to get in there and understand what exactly motivates these characters and what comprises their personality. And time again, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is the kind of game that shows us that the character's design only says so much. More than anything, it's the personality, the traits of this character that speaks way more about what this character is than just the design. And interestingly enough, as strange and skimpy or controversial as Pyra's outfit can be, there is a bit of symbolism in there. Some people may not like this, but this is what it is. The whole point of the symbolism is to show that Rex and Pyra are two sides of the single coin. They're both the two halves of the same whole, and there is that significance that some people shouldn't discount, and it just goes to show that you shouldn't kind of base all your judgments on appearances alone. And interestingly enough, since we're talking about retrospectives, I actually had the very rare, unique privilege of sharing this information, the symbolism that Rex and Pyra complete each other, with the voice actors of Pyra, which was just a really fun moment on the channel overall for the last year or two. But even when it came to the design of Pyra, I found it so fascinating. Someone actually pointed this out to me on Twitter, that, because, you understand the story, how Rex and Pyra, they share a core crystal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they share a core crystal, but you'll actually notice that all the parts that are bare skin on Pyra's outfit are covered on Rex's outfit, and all the parts that are bare skin on Rex's outfit are covered on Pyra's outfit, because they complete each other.
What?
Oh, you didn't know that? Oh, okay, well, happy to break the news. Surprise! Surprise! It's so much deeper.
That.
It's super deep. Now, when I mentioned that fan service could be used as a resource just like graphics or a soundtrack, I mean it in a very different way than what most people think. Fan service goes far beyond just skimpy outfits and jiggle physics, but rather references to past games, or in the very least, just giving the appeal for new fans to make their way into the series. And to be honest, like I said earlier, I missed out on Xenoblade Chronicles 1 for the Wii and Xenoblade Chronicles X, but ever since this past year and how much I enjoyed playing this game, I actually got that interest into playing the previous ones. I'm currently working my way through Xenoblade Chronicles 1 right now on the 3DS, and just a day ago, right before I started recording this video, I bought a copy of Xenoblade Chronicles X, and that's honestly what fan service should strive to do, is to appeal to old fans while at the same time simultaneously making new fans, and I feel that Xenoblade Chronicles 2 has done that in so many different ways. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 has always been very in your face regarding its cutscenes, how there's so much action, there's so much compelling plot and story and character development that you kind of want to thirst for more. You wish you can know more characters and get to know what their stories are, understand their motivations, and sometimes we can go ahead and pick our favorites. So part of the reason why Xenoblade Chronicles 2 has lasted for so long is because of how much choice it gives us. Of course, this is further encapsulated by the blades that exist within the game, and the blades, each and of themselves, may have similar traits to one another, especially if they all fall under the same weapon class, but then when you keep going forward, you realize that each of these blades just have small enough differences to make them feel unique in and of themselves. Not to mention that the folks at Monolith Software have pulled many favors to bring all the artists together, very well-known artists in some cases, to design these blades, and honestly, everyone is bound to pick their favorites. Obviously, there are plenty of things like objectivity and viability that people have, saying that some blades are just inherently stronger than others, but for the most part, what makes Xenoblade Chronicles 2 shine so much is that the combat is simple enough and streamlined enough that you would be able to make every blade serve very well. For example, I do like the example of Pyra being the starter blade of sorts, kind of like a starter Pokemon, if you will, and if you invest all the time and effort into her, then you will be able to solo the entire game, as I personally have this past year on a live stream. Going forward with the aspect of the blades, honestly, because of all the choices that are given to us, everyone would have a wholly unique experience, and this is something that I wish more RPGs could strive for. The thing about, people that aren't familiar with this, when you unlock cores, it kind of works like a gacha game or a mobile game where you have elements of randomness to it. Every single person has different probabilities when they start a new game file, so the first opening 6 hours or so are going to be remarkably different compared to your friends who have the exact same game. So for example, let's just say you're one of the lucky few to open up, let's say 6 core crystals. Most of them are going to be commons, but then you get one rare blade, and the rare blade is Boreas. Boreas is a very potent defensive type healer, very useful overall, so it's going to dictate how your playthrough is going to go for the first couple of boss battles. And of course, if you're like me and you're completely new to this series and you have no idea how the game mechanics work, you're going to find you're going to be lasting quite some time just because of how good a healer Boreas is. On the other hand, that person that unlocked the Boreas has a best friend, and they also play Xenoblade Chronicles 2. They can get someone like Zenobia being a very powerful wind element, same element as Boreas, but she leans far more towards the offensive side, so for that particular person, they might notice that in their playthrough, everyone's just dropping that much faster. It really does help the experience feel unique on a gameplay perspective, and I really do wish more RPGs would kind of serve to replicate that in some capacity. I've always said that the whole core rare blade system is kind of like all the fun of a gacha game, but minus all the heartbreak of completely destroying your wallet. Now, let's talk about the story of Xenoblade Chronicles 2. The thing about the story of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, especially in comparison to its predecessors, is that it's a lot more focused this time around, where Xenoblade Chronicles 1 would challenge things like inevitability and facing fate on your own terms. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 instead is just completely centered around Rex and his dream to save the world from certain extinction. There's nothing particularly wrong with that, but the whole point of the story this time around is to provide a framework for getting to know all the different characters, and as it is, all the cutscenes that we have inside the game, if you were to kind of pile them all together, there would be less hours inside of Xenoblade Chronicles 2's main cutscenes in comparison to the first game, and yet it never felt like they rushed it too much. It never felt like they didn't give each character their own fair chance to shine. Each of the characters in Xenoblade Chronicles 2 felt very validated in their existence, and they did very much to sort of flesh out the overall worlds and the overall narrative to make it feel like a real place, and that's extremely valuable to me too. But aside from the playable characters, each of these playable characters could have totally been protagonists in their own respective games. However, this is Pyra and Rex's story, but they still work as good secondaries. But in terms of that, you can also think of the villains of this game. The villains are quite compelling this time around, especially Jin. Jin working as sort of an anti-hero at this point. One of the most compelling characters in the entire game, and honestly, he kind of serves as a benchmark for what every good anti-hero type villain should strive to be. Because his motivations, while you may come to resent them, you can also bring yourself to understand them, and that's part of what makes him so effective in terms of driving the story forward, and how he contrasts to the main character in the concepts of death and rebirth. Now, another character I wanted to point out would be Amalthus. Amalthus, he pretty much represents what you'd expect from a Xeno series. For those of you guys that are unfamiliar, and even for people like me that are unfamiliar, the Xeno series is never afraid to draw religious parallels, philosophical or even ideological references in their work. Of course, if you're trying to look for a deep experience, you're not going to get it over here, just as it is with all the other Xeno games, but it is nice to have it there in a way that doesn't feel ham-fisted, or even some strange dogmatic or anti-dogmatic propaganda of sorts to be found here. More than anything, it just serves to supplement, to show more and more of the different layers that you can find within the world, and honestly, that's part of what makes this so fun. And like I said earlier, the whole point of fan service is to kind of draw people in out of their comfort zones into new things, and narratives like this definitely do serve to do something like that as well for people that are interested in things like philosophy in general. But of course, as much as we enjoy the cutscenes, eventually after 5 dozen playthroughs, we may wish to skip them and get straight into the action, the gameplay of the matter. And the interesting thing I've noticed when I was playing Xenoblade Chronicles 1 is that in comparison, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is very streamlined in its approach to how they do combat. While there's so many different blades to come from, and with the different driver combinations who all have different movesets to go with the blades, you'll actually find there's about a potential 50 plus movesets that you can choose from, giving you so much customizability. Not to mention that each blade that's there has so many different passives to choose from that make them play just slightly different from their peers in this same weapon class. That being said though, it all seems overwhelming at first, but to be honest though, the streamlining of the combat this time around actually enables you to have more expression in the things you do. Like I mentioned earlier, if you had a blade that you really liked and you want to soup them up as best you can because they were your favorites and you want to invest the time in them, you totally can do that, and there's nothing to stop you. There's plenty of different build ideas out there, and to be honest, for not even just for this channel, but a lot of channels out there on YouTube have done a lot to kind of bring out the potential of what you can do in this game, and the results were just staggering in my mind to see the damage outputs that blades that I originally thought were weak could actually do very well in challenge mode, better than I ever could even. So the thing about the whole, the streamlining and the gameplay of this game is that it does come with a bit of a learning curve, as you have seen and you probably heard some people complain about, and it's a complaint that I can wholly agree with. The fact is, when you fight against any typical enemy, you might find that you accidentally pull someone that's way higher level than you. This is something you can't escape, this is something you have to learn, and that is just the cost of having an open world experience. Speaking of open world, the open world exploration is actually quite good, and honestly, it's some of the best that we've seen in quite some time for the genre itself, and I guess that shouldn't be surprising, considering that some of the team members of Breath of the Wild also had a hand in designing the maps of this game. So really, there's just so much about this world that's so sprawling, adds so much replayability. On top of that, all the DLCs really do give at least 12 hours a piece for each piece of DLC of replayability. all of the new blades in their own way have really done something to sort of provide a new perspective on the different roles that they would try to fill, such as Corvin and Crossette, and even Poppy Buster, who kind of functions as a much faster paced shield hammer. But I think my favorite DLC blades would have to be the ones that are references to past characters, and honestly, this was probably the reason why I was so eager to play the older games. When I saw Shulk and Fiora, I thought to myself, I recognize these guys instantly in my brief time playing Xenoblade Chronicles 1 on the 3DS, but then as I got to play them in this game, they were substantially much more powerful than most of the other blades that I had already. Shulk has some great utility with his vision ability, his ability to completely negate whole amounts of damage just by a single press of the button, which was very, very good. And then you have Fiora, who's this whole beast of a crit recharger. She's able to shred through entire waves of enemies in challenge mode, making her very effective overall. And then finally there was Elma. Elma, my personal favorite DLC blade, just brings so many new things to the table. Like, she just has this epic ability called Overdrive, where she can kind of buff up the stats of your team as you play through the game. And if you play this certain way, if you play things optimally, you're going to get through the fights just fine. And the best part about this is that she brings the awesome Xenoblade Chronicles X soundtrack towards the game, at least 2 tracks, but still 2 is better than nothing. And same thing can be said for Xenoblade Chronicles 1, where they brought 1 as well. The thing about this, though, is that it kind of goes back to what I said, how fan service can be used as either a detriment or a benefit to a game, and the inclusion of these old characters definitely serve to benefit this game and bring new fans into the fold, such as myself. Like I said earlier, I had very, very little interest in playing Xenoblade Chronicles at all when they first announced Xenoblade Chronicles 2 at the Switch Direct in 2016. However, as I got to play this game more and more, and as I saw how passionate the fan base was, I became more and more intrigued. And interestingly enough, all it took was just that little controversy, that little buzz from the mouths of Polygon and Otaku to get me into it even further. And the thing is, though, there's so much game to be around here. The expansion pass alone was just the greatest value you could ever find in any DLC ever. Most of the DLC packages of most games would give you some free loot crates here and there, and maybe an additional map or 5, but for this particular DLC, it was $40 on top of the original cost, and it's like $90 to get a new game here in Canada, so that'll be $130, which seems like a steep price at first, until you consider that each of the 5 DLC packs that came with the expansion pass would handily give at least 12 additional hours, and then that's not even including the Torna The Golden Country expansion pass, which is essentially just a whole new game on itself. It borrows plenty of resources from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, but has a much faster gameplay style, and honestly, it was just a great way to bookend the game. The funny thing about Torna The Golden Country, I don't want to spoil it too much for the sake of people that haven't played it yet, Torna The Golden Country did so much to make me want to play Xenoblade Chronicles 2 all over again, now that I understand the core conflicts and motivations of particular characters in that story mode. And honestly, that's just so much value. It's actually staggering to consider that they would basically give you what was almost a full game at that point, and I believe they even had physical copies, so they kind of could pass that off as a game and not get into legal trouble with it, which is just impressive all on its own. So the fact is that there's so much value here, and Monolith has clearly had so much passion, and they wanted to make sure that people came away from this game thinking to themselves that this is a fantastic, fantastic piece of work here, and I really do want to try out for some more. It's really funny to think that most people, they would come here for the fan service, but they would leave becoming fans themselves, as I have. And honestly, for people that were ever on the fence for this game, they definitely need to give this one a try. And on the eve of the first year anniversary of this game, honestly, I do look forward to what Monolith Software has to bring further to the table, whether it's on Nintendo Switch, for Xenoblade Chronicles in the future, or for whatever IP they want to bring to the table. I'm very much looking forward to what they do, and honestly, they should be very proud of themselves, because it was a very rocky launch. There was a lot of weird issues and bugs, and honestly, it was just that strange learning curve that I mentioned with the aggro. And they were also very heavy-handed with the tutorials, which, strangely enough, were much more improved in Torna The Golden Country, so it does show that they are open to criticism, that they are open to learning and improving, and I can only see them getting better from this point onwards. So anyways, guys, that pretty much does it for the retrospective. So many things can be said about how well they've done this time around, and honestly, if looking to the past has shown us anything, is that they have a very bright future, and so does Nintendo. They've been on such a roll this past year alone, and yeah, things are just looking really, really good for us right now. So this is pretty much going to be our last Xenoblade Chronicles 2 video we ever make, most likely, and it's just been a very, very fun year. I was just surprised at all the people that I've met, some great people, other content creators that I've met along the way, the ones that I've interacted with, and I've made a lot of friends as a result of covering this game here on YouTube, talking about it on the Discord. It's a fantastic, fantastic experience, and honestly, that $130 that I mentioned that I had to spend on this game wasn't even a dent on what I ended up getting. Such amazing value inside the game and outside of it, and honestly, that's part of what I look forward to whenever I get any game, and some of these experiences just can't be replicated and just absolutely phenomenal in my mind.